Okay, so let's go over kind of how to use these. Now, I am not a big fan of using the graphs. I like using the unit circle a little bit better. But you do have to use the unit circle with just a little bit of caution. Okay? All right, because we have to think about where my graphs actually exist. Whoa, hello. My screen just moved like big time. Sorry about that. Okay. So here we go. So if I look at my graphs in my unit circle, okay? So we're going to talk about where sine inverse happens, where cosine inverse happens, where tangent inverse happens. So sine inverse, cosine inverse, and tangent inverse all live in the first quadrant. Okay? Cosine inverse will live in the second quadrant because remember, it's cosine goes from 0 to pi when we restrict the domain. Okay, and then in the fourth quadrant, because we're going into the negative pi over 2's, that's the fourth quadrant for sine inverse and tangent inverse. Okay, but we're using negative angles. So this is negative pi over 2. This is negative pi over 3, negative pi over 4, negative pi over 6. So we do need to be very careful when we do this, okay? All right, so I'm going to move this a little bit. All right, so now what you another thing to understand about inverses, okay? So there are several different notations. We can say sine -1 of x, so that's sine inverse of x. Okay, we can also use the term arc. Okay, you might also see a capital A. All right, so these, kind of depends on, what kind of book you're using, how old the book is. These notations actually do mean different things, but we're not really going to get into that right now. Okay, now, so let's go through the differences between me asking you what cosine of an angle is versus me asking you what cosine inverse of a value is. Okay, so when I ask you sine, cosine, and tangent, what's going on is your x value is always an angle. What's sine of pi over 6? What's sine of 60 degrees? What's tangent of 45 degrees? And then your answer is some sort of ratio. It's 1/2. It's radical 3 over 2. It's, 5 over 12. Something like that. Well, when we do the inverses, remember when we do inverses, things switch around. So I'm giving you the ratio now, and you're telling me the angle that goes with it. Now, since I have restricted the domains and the ranges, you are restricted to one answer. Okay, so if, for example, I say, okay, what is sine inverse of 1/2? What you would look for is you go back up to your unit circle, you look in the first quadrant and the fourth quadrant with the negatives, And you'd look for where sine gives you a positive 1/2, and that happens at pi over 6. Okay, and that would be your answer. So let's try another one. Let's say I ask you for arc cosine of -3/2. Okay, so you would look at your unit circle. Okay, you'd look from 0 to pi, and you'd say, okay, I'm looking for a cosine ratio of -3/2. Remember, that's the first one. Oh, that happens at 5 pi over 6. And that would be your answer. I give you the ratio, you give me the angle. Now, tangent is the most difficult, I think. Okay, so let's work on a tangent one. So if I ask you tangent inverse of radical 3, I have to remember that tangent is sine over cosine. Okay, so what I'm looking for is I'm looking for a sine value with a radical 3 on the top. Okay, so radical 3/2 and then cosine value of 1/2. So since it's positive, I'm going to be looking in the first quadrant, and that's going to happen at pi over 3. Okay. Now, another thing that could happen is problems like this. Okay. So you have an arc sine of a cosine ratio of an angle. Okay. So what you're going to do is you're going to work from the inside out. So you're going to evaluate this bit first. Okay, so remember that that's cosine of an angle. So in this bit, you should get a ratio. Okay, so cosine 5 pi over 6, if you look at your unit circle, it's going to be negative radical 3/2. So now I want to know what angle gives you a ratio of negative radical 3/2, and I want to use sine this time. So remember, you're restricted from negative pi over 2 to positive pi over 2. So that is going to happen at negative pi over 3. And again, all I'm doing is I'm using that unit circle. Okay, the more familiar you are with the unit circle, the faster it's going to be. Okay, so again, we look for that sine value of negative radical 3/2. That's always the second one. Oh, look, that's where we are. Okay. All right. Let's try another one of those. Let's do tangent of the arc cosine of 1/2. Okay, so this right here, you're going to work from inside out. So this right here, you're going to get a ratio. Oh, excuse me, an angle. Okay, so arc cosine of 1/2. Okay, so remember that cosine is between 0 to pi. Okay, so that is going to happen at pi over 3. So tangent of pi over 3, well, we got to remember that tangent is sine over cosine. So that's going to be radical 3/2 all over 1/2. So that's going to be radical 3. Okay? All right. So what we're going to do in the next video is we're going to continue this. Okay? We're going to talk about equations. Okay? Because there's a difference between evaluate and equations. Okay?